Fast forward. Ad break. I hit the mute button and stand up from my comfy chair, stretching and wander into the kitchen, eyeing the fridge. Swinging the metallic doors open, I cast my eyes over the shelves. Cheese, expired. Milk, expired. Sauces and relishes, probably expired too. Cider it is, I guess. Walking a little awkwardly, my legs are still half asleep, back through to the TV. I sit back down, opening the cider and taking a sip before setting it down on the table beside me, missing the coaster entirely but not really caring. I return halfway through an infomercial for ceramic knives. A youthful brunette woman stands in 2/3 of the kitchen, slicing up a chunk of raw meat dripping with blood. The set is dimly lit, the outline of cupboards and counters barely visible in the background, but she's standing in the spotlight, harsh shadows highlighting a set of ceramic knives with shining black blades and dull silver handles. Sliding the chopping board to one side, she picks up a stack of paper. At first it appears to be blank, but at second glance I notice it's a stack of documents of some kind. They don't look like the standard fare for an infomercial. If anything, they look like blank statements. I've seen this kind of infomercial before, and usually they slice through the edge of the paper, chopping off one of the corners. However, this woman sliced clean through the middle of the paper at an odd angle, not quite diagonal from corner to corner, and shoves them back off camera a little angrily. Her fury builds as she pulls the meat back on screen, discarding the blank-bladed chef knife and pulling a cleaver from the block beside her. She hacks and chops viciously at the slab of what presumably used to be a cow, slowly beginning to smile. There's a glint of madness in her eyes, something frenzied about her movements as she picked up the vegetable knife with her free hand, shredding the meat from both knives at once. Slowly her feeding frenzy dies down. Out of sheer curiosity, I reach for the remote, tapping the mute button. The woman talks about how the knives are sharper than steel and don't blunt as easily, how they don't shatter. My mind wanders to the oh-so-familiar fact that I'm probably the only person on the planet who can't skip these things, or at the very least fast-forward them. Still, I guess I don't really mind. It gives me some time to grab a drink, maybe go to the bathroom, all without missing it. The infomercial ends, and a commercial for women's clothing begins. Yawning, I go for the mute button again and make my way to the bathroom. Coming back, I catch the end of a commercial for hair dye, and the entirety of one for makeup. A woman, also brunette, applies mascara in front of a mirror in a well-lit, almost harshly lit close-up. Her hands are shaking, and the black goo drips from the brush across her slightly tear-stained face. The camera zooms out as her grip on the brush tightens and a smile twists across her face. She hurls the brush at a mirror, her still shaking hands snatching at lipstick, roughly applying it to her lips as a deranged smile plays across them. And I take it off mute to discover she's talking in a distraught, high-pitched whisper, unintelligible apart from the occasional exclamation of "with her?" and "how could he?" and wordless exclamations of fury. The camera zooms out more, and she angrily sweeps several other cosmetic products off a counter in front of her, and they clatter into the sink, smashing bottles as skin-colored goo blends with the powder and more mascara, dripping slowly and steadily into the sink as tears fall. Once again, the commercial ends, a logo half-heartedly flashing up on the screen. I take a sip of my cider, the harsh apple flavour biting my tongue. As the show starts back up, I settle in for a while. About half an hour later, with little else to do, I switch over to the +1 channel. These things are handy, I guess. That said, I'm still in the minority that watches them rather than recording a show or just watching it online. I reached the episode that I was watching earlier, finishing the last of my cider as the next one starts. Setting it back on the table, I knock the remote to the floor. It's still there later when the adverts start up again halfway through. The same set as before, and this time I hear everything. A man headed slowly but surely towards middle age, but still retaining some of his youthful looks, steps into an expensive-looking jeweler's. The camera shows a series of close-up panning shots of gold and silver and bronze and all manner of gemstones, resting on a mannequin's hand set against a background of seemingly endless blue velvet. The voiceover gives the name of the store, and the camera cuts back to the man from earlier, and finally to him standing behind a woman a few years older than he, lingering briefly on his hand as he wraps a necklace, silver studded with emeralds, around the woman's slender neck. Her hands, smooth and free of any jewelry, brush against his ring-adorned fingers. Most of the rings I recognized from earlier in the commercial, but one, sitting at the base of his ring finger, didn't look familiar. It looked cheaper. Nice, but not as nice as the rest. And much plainer. Low quality gold, perhaps, and adorned with no gemstones. Throughout all this, soft classical music plays. The scene fades to "Your beloved deserves the best. Your beloved deserves G. Simmons." I yawn, check the time, and down the last of my cider. I feel like getting another one, but I feel like the infomercial should be back on soon. My suspicions were confirmed as the infomercial did indeed begin anew. Opening on a close-up of the knife set, their black ceramic blades shining from an off-camera spotlight, their silver handles still looking remarkably dull, laid out on a counter. The chef's knife I had seen earlier was missing, and there was a conspicuous empty space where it should have been between a smaller knife and a cleaver. The set was rounded out by a vegetable knife, again the one from earlier, and a peeler. The voiceover started up, a little skewered. It sounded like it was being read from a script by a woman, maybe 45 years old, clearly terrified out of her wits. She raced through the names of the knives, the company, and introduced the presenter, no doubt the woman I'd seen earlier. There was the sound of meat being sliced in two, abruptly silenced as the microphone was cut off. After a few minutes, the brunette stepped into the same two-thirds of the kitchen as before, wiping the ceramic chef's knife on her apron, blade up so not to slice through the white fabric. I'm not sure whether I imagined it, but just before she stepped behind the corner, I swear an ugly red blotch was visible where the knife had been for the merest fraction of a second. Times like these I wish I could pause. Ebon precision ceramic knives are among the toughest on the market. They can slice through steak after steak without losing the sharper-than-steel edge. She pulled a chopping board into shot. A huge chunk of meat, perhaps a leg, slowly dripped gore onto the sturdy wooden surface of the chopping board. She stabbed the knife into it, laughing frantically, wide-eyed. "Of course, this isn't steak. Oh no, this is chicken." At the last word, she tore the knife out, sticking it into the bloody chunk of meat again and again before regaining her composure. "Of course there's more. Our peelers are so sharp, they can't just slice up vegetables," she said, peeling the carrots and holding it in a way that made me feel uncomfortable. "Oh no, you can skin meat with this. Here's a chunk of pig." She reached off camera again, pulling a dripping slice of pork, the pale skin attached into shot. She took the peeler to it with real gusto, thin blood seeping from the freshly ripped and shredded skin. "See how clearly it tears through everything?" she proclaimed, lifting the freshly peeled meat off the blood-soaked chopping board and hurling it down. A smile flickered across her mask of anger as it hit the studio floor with a soft splat. She dragged the chicken, which was clearly red meat of some kind, back into shot. "And see how this exquisite chef knife chops and slices this cheating, pathetic chicken," she screeched, sliding it off again and bringing the documents into shot. "See how it slices through these bank statements, the statements from our joint account, the account the pig used to buy her necklace, our joint account." She ranted, eyes gleaming with madness as she ran the shining blank knife through the paper, growing slightly calm as she did so. She shoved the paper-covered chopping board off camera, scattering ripped-up bank sheets. She grew angry once more and brought the red meat back into shot, discarding the chef knife, which stuck into the slab of pork on the floor with a sticky squelch, and pulling out the cleaver. She mumbles to herself as she hacked it up. unintelligible words punctuated with laughter and exclamation of "How could he?" and "With that harpy!" and faint screams. She pulled out the vegetable knife, hacking and tearing at the meat with renewed gleeful anger, until slowly her feeding frenzy dies down. Ebon precision knives are sharper than steel, and will never lose their edge. They're the finest quality knives on the market, the ideal choice for slicing, for chopping, for peeling, and for dealing with whatever may come your way. Her eyes glinted maliciously with these last few words. I wandered through into the kitchen for a fresh bottle of cider. Catching the end of a clothing commercial, a woman looking slightly distraught walks out of a cheap clothing store, her knuckles white as she grips the dark blue handles of a bulging plastic bag, the logo turned to the camera. As the commercial for Head Eye begins again, I'm disturbed from my morbid curiosity by a knock on the door. I open it a fraction to see a blonde-haired woman standing on my doorstep, silhouetted in the light from behind me against the bungalows across the street. Makeup starting to run down her face, eyes brimming over with tears. Her clothing looks cheap, although that may just be from the lighting. Glancing around at the unfriendly assortments of buildings that unfortunately comprise of my neighborhood, she began to speak. Can I use your phone? Your light was on and my car. She gestured to a vehicle parked a little way down the street. A black hatchback. It didn't look particularly old, but it had seen better days. Nodding, I opened the door to let her in. I live in a bad neighborhood. Lucky for her, she found one of maybe 3 houses on the block who would be willing to help. I lead her to the phone, lifting the handset for her, and thinking I must be one of the last few people to own a rotary dial phone. And turn... I feel it before I see it, before I can react. Icy cold metal bites into my neck, and I stare down in horror as I see a silver necklace, inlaid with emeralds and encrusted with blood that looked almost fresh. As if through a heavy fog, I hear the woman speak. Sorry, but I can't afford any witnesses. Credit to Bernot. Flash forward.